All right, so this conflict around Iran has been keeping the world on edge for over a month now. And the big question isn't really if something will happen, but what happens next. Now, we're not going to try and predict months down the line. In this explainer, we are zeroing in on the really critical next 2 weeks, breaking down the most likely ways this whole high-stakes standoff could play out.
So picture this. For more than 30 days, the Strait of Hormuz, which is this absolutely vital artery for global trade, has been on a knife's edge. We're talking military posturing, attacks on ships, oil prices going haywire. And this isn't just some regional flare-up, you know? The tension you see right here is sending out these huge economic shockwaves all around the globe, and we're already starting to feel them.
So yeah, that brings us to the crucial question. Are we about to tip over into a much wider war? Are we settling into some kind of tense, uneasy peace? Or is it something else entirely? To figure that out, we have to decode what every key player is trying to do and see where this is all most likely to go.
Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we'll start with the bottom line up front. Then we'll walk through 4 possible futures. After that, we'll take a close look at the world's key players and the new alignments they're forming. And finally, we'll trace that ripple effect right back to the global economy.
First up, let's talk about what this situation is turning into a dangerous new phase. And we're giving you the big conclusion right here at the start, so you know exactly where our analysis is headed.
So here's the most important thing to get right away. If you're expecting this to have a quick victory or a clean ending, think again. The expert analysis is pretty clear. We are heading into a much longer, much more dangerous middle phase. Think of it less like a war with a clear finish line, and more like a really messy, high-stakes bargaining contest, where every side is just constantly probing and testing and pushing to get an advantage.
So if we're in a messy middle phase, what does that actually look like? Well, if we look at it from a kind of game theory perspective, it gives us 4 pretty distinct possibilities for the next 10 to 15 days, and each one has its own probability based on what everybody wants right now. Now, this is where it gets really fascinating, when you see how the odds stack up. Take a look. The most likely scenario, at a 45% chance, is what's called an extended limited war. Now, compare that to the all-out military option, a forced reopening of the strait, that's got a tiny 5% chance. That massive gap tells you the real struggle, the real fight, is happening right there in the middle, with both diplomatic containment and sharper escalation sitting at a 25% chance. Okay, so let's quickly put some definitions on these. Extended limited war is basically more of what we're seeing now, just hotter. More strikes and shipping becomes really risky. Diplomatic containment would be a UN or coalition trying to protect ships without actually starting a war. Sharper escalation, that's the real wild card. One big attack on a tanker or some critical piece of infrastructure could change the whole game overnight. And that 5% chance of forced reopening, well, that's the full-blown military campaign that pretty much everyone wants to avoid.
But you know, these odds don't just come out of nowhere, right? To really understand why those are the odds, you have to understand the players. This isn't random. It's a global chessboard, and each country's motivation is what's going to decide which of those futures becomes our reality.
The United States is walking a real tightrope here. Their strategy is all about managed pressure, so lots of surveillance, making credible threats to strike, but really holding back from a full-scale operation. It keeps Iran guessing, sure, but it also creates massive uncertainty in the markets.
And Iran's strategy is just as calculated. They're using what you could call calibrated disruption, basically causing just enough economic pain to be felt around the world, but very carefully avoiding any single big incident that would unite everybody against them. It's a masterclass in staying in that gray zone.
Israel's thinking is different. The analysis shows that they actually want these operations to continue to weaken Iran's military capabilities right now. For them, a premature ceasefire that leaves Iran's power intact, well, that's seen as a strategic loss. Now, Russia and China, they are united on one thing. They do not want an all-out war. But the reasons are different. Russia is playing the opportunist, looking to gain some leverage while the West is distracted. China, on the other hand, is a massive energy importer, so they're the ones pushing hardest for a diplomatic fix to protect their vital economic interests.
And what about Europe? Well, they're trying to carve out a path right down the middle. Key leaders like in France have flat out called a forced military reopening unrealistic. So their focus is all on diplomacy and creating some kind of defensive maritime group, protecting ships, not joining an offensive war.
And when you mix all these competing goals together, you get this really fascinating geopolitical shift. This isn't about the old, rigid alliances anymore. We are watching new, fluid alignments form, and they're based on one thing: immediate self-interest.
So instead of neat little blocks, we're seeing three distinct camps pop up: the pressure camp, the containment camp, and the opportunist camp.
And here's the breakdown. First, you've got the pressure camp. That's the US, Israel, and some Gulf states. Their goal is to actively weaken Iran's military power. Then there's the much bigger containment camp. Europe, China, a lot of Asia. And their main goal is just to get ships moving again without starting a huge war. And finally, you have the opportunist camp, which is mainly Russia, looking to cash in on the chaos. It's these competing goals that are fueling this whole messy, unpredictable middle phase.
So, why does all this geopolitical chess matter to you, to us? Well, let's connect the dots and talk about the ripple effect, because this comes with a very real price tag for the entire global economy.
It starts right here, at the pump. In the United States, this whole disruption has already sent fuel prices climbing. And this isn't some abstract economic theory. It's a direct hit to your wallet every single time you have to fill up.
And look, this isn't just a guess. Reuters directly connected a presidential speech about this conflict to a sharp spike in fuel prices. And they're warning that diesel, which is the fuel that powers our entire supply chain, is probably going to surge even higher if this keeps up.
Because that higher cost for diesel kicks off a chain reaction. First, shipping gets disrupted. That makes diesel more expensive. Then, freight and trucking costs go up, and that makes everything that travels on a truck more expensive, from food to fertilizer. And that's exactly how a crisis in the Strait of Hormuz ends up affecting the price of your groceries. So, let's bring it all home. The key takeaway from all of this is that some kind of escalation is now more likely than a clean de-escalation. But, and this is probably the most critical part, the path we're most likely on is a controlled escalation. It's messy, it's prolonged, but it's not a sudden slide into an all-out regional war. And this leaves us with the million-dollar question, doesn't it? The most likely path forward is a controlled escalation, but in a region as volatile with so many different players pushing their own agendas, you have to wonder, how long can anything truly stay controlled?